Hey, glad you're here. Today, we're uncovering 15 ancient birth control rituals used by courtesans in old India. And I promise, they get weirder the deeper we go. The first few might make you raise an eyebrow, but by the end, you'll be questioning whether some of these were even humanly possible. These weren't just herbs and prayers. Some involved fire, some involved blood, and some... Stick around, because each method reveals more about what these women endured just to stay in control of their own bodies. In a time when lineage ruled law and sons were currency, a courtesan's greatest liability was life itself. To conceive was to lose value. To bear a child was to risk exile. And so, they crafted systems, part mysticism, part medicine, all necessity, to ensure that the pleasure they sold never took root in the womb. The first and perhaps most chilling of these was the serpent coil ritual. In temples dedicated to the goddess Manasa, protector of fertility and serpents, young courtesans were taken once a month to the shrines beneath the earth, where snakes slithered freely around stone altars. A priestess, always blindfolded, would tie a thin coil of braided silver and dried cobra skin around the girl's waist. She was told not to remove it for 3 nights. The belief that the serpent's memory would confuse the male seed, coiling it inward until it strangled itself. Modern scholars argue this may have been more symbolic than effective, but the scarring from skin infections caused by prolonged wear tells another story. There are even preserved medical records in Ayurvedic scrolls detailing treatment for ritual ulcers near the abdomen, suggesting this wasn't rare. But for some girls, ritual wasn't enough. They turned to objects. In the southern kingdoms, courtesans were known to use jade eggs, carved smooth from cool green stone, blessed with mantras, and inserted into the body before each appointment. These eggs were left in for hours, sometimes overnight. Not only did they block the passage of seed, but it was believed the stone absorbed impure heat, rendering the act spiritually neutral. However, jade is porous, and the absence of proper sanitation often led to infections that spread quickly. One recovered text from the court of the Chola dynasty describes a dancer who soured from within like unboiled milk, her health deteriorating after repeated use of the same sacred egg. Yet the practice persisted, because pain was preferable to pregnancy. Even more bizarre was the whispering thread ceremony, performed only on full moons. Here, elder courtesans would take a single hair from a virgin girl and tie it to the ankle of the one seeking protection. Then, while chanting inverted Vedic verses, yes, backward chanting, they would drip heated sesame oil down her spine. The heat was meant to close the channels of entry, and the hair, symbolically, bound her fate to the untouched. If the girl conceived after such a ritual, the elder was publicly shamed and stripped of her ceremonial beads. Records from Varanasi's temple court archives show entries marked "broken vow" next to several women's names, and the penalties that followed: demotion, isolation, or worse, being assigned to the cremation hall as a temple attendant. And yet, not all methods were as elaborate. Some relied purely on timing and deception. A small group of courtesans in the Gupta period practiced what we might call proto-abstinence, calculated through moon cycles. They tracked their own fertility by etching notches on stone slates, one for each day since their last bleeding. If a client requested intimacy on a high-risk day, they'd instead offer the kiss of fire, a coded phrase for non-penetrative service involving oil, breathwork, and prolonged eye contact, meant to simulate ecstasy without risk. Some male clients reportedly preferred it, believing it prolonged their virility. Others found it emasculating and retaliated, leading to broken contracts or worse. There was also a peculiar dietary practice followed by women from the Western kingdoms, consuming daily mixtures of pomegranate seed, tamarind, and black salt, believed to cool the womb. While pomegranate has mild estrogenic effects and tamarind contains natural laxatives, there is no medical consensus on whether this had any contraceptive value. What is known is that many women who followed this regimen developed severe digestive issues, including chronic dehydration and ulcers. But again, better than bearing a child in a world that would reject both mother and infant. A rare bronze tablet discovered near Madurai even documents a moon-blessing herb called Vrishaparna, which courtesans boiled into tea and drank after each client visit. The inscription warned, 1 sip silences the seed, 2 will silence the mother. Scholars believe this was an early form of herbal abortifacient, likely containing heavy metals or neurotoxins. It was used in secret and shared only between sisters of the veil. All of this, the pain, the fire, the serpents, the stones, served one purpose: autonomy, or at least the illusion of it. Because in a world where the body was a contract and motherhood a breach, every ritual became both armor and prison. And each method, no matter how painful, was a refusal to be owned beyond the act itself. And yet, one must ask, if a courtesan could twist the rules of nature, bend the gods to her will, and silence the consequences of pleasure, what else did she know that we've forgotten? By now, you've seen the pain behind the beauty, the ritual cloaked in silk. But step deeper, and you'll find that not all methods were devised for prevention. Some were disguised as worship, others as punishment. And in the heart of ancient Indian temple cities, birth control became something stranger, something almost divine. In the northern regions, particularly around Kashi, girls were brought into the house of sacred bleeding, a sanctum where young courtesans were taught not just how to dance or serve, but how to control what the priests called the sacred blood gate. They believed that menstruation could be trained, delayed, summoned, or even reversed by mastering one's breath and posture. Girls were forced to kneel over heated stones, their spines straight, their mouths closed, while elder priestesses recited tantric hymns and burned camphor beneath their skirts. If a girl could remain motionless for 10 cycles of breath, she was said to have mastered her vessel. But if she trembled, she was beaten with neem twigs, under the belief that pain would seal the gate tighter. Some girls were taught a method now lost to mainstream Ayurveda, the earthen knot practice. It involved inserting small clay marbles, handcrafted by temple boys during monsoon months, into the body, coated with turmeric and ghee. These marbles would harden with body heat and absorb moisture. After use, they were burned in front of the girl, accompanied by chants meant to release trapped male energy. Archaeologists uncovered several such scorched beads near an abandoned Jain monastery in Bihar, alongside bone needles and scorched cloth, signs that this wasn't symbolic. It was systemic. But the most feared rite was the offering of ashes. When a courtesan was believed to have been cursed, either by pregnancy or miscarriage, she was brought to a shadowed chamber behind the temple's cremation site. There, a priest would mix powdered ash from funeral pyres with cow urine and jasmine petals, forming a thick black paste. This paste was smeared in a circle around the girl's belly, while a hymn to Kali, the goddess of time and destruction, was whispered into her ear, backward. Then came the main act. The paste was scraped off with a copper knife, a symbol of purification. This ritual was believed to erase life from within, and after undergoing it, the girl would not be spoken to for 3 days. In some texts, this is referred to as a living funeral. It wasn't just a contraceptive act, it was spiritual euthanasia. Others were subjected to the lotus of salt, a more merciful method, at least in appearance. A soft lotus-shaped bundle of muslin, filled with crushed rock salt, ginger root, and neem, was inserted after intercourse. The girl would then squat over steam baths infused with vetiver and gooseberry. The salt was said to dry the womb, the steam to lift the sins. But modern analysis of similar mixtures found in preserved bundles indicates high levels of acidity, enough to scar internal tissue with repeated use. And yet, these girls returned to the bathhouse week after week because scars were less dangerous than scandal. Not all rituals came from priests or elders. Some were whispered between courtesans in secret, like the midnight churn. This involved drinking a concoction of goat's milk, crushed coral, and the juice of unripe fig under a waning moon. The girl would then lie upside down, her feet against the wall, while another courtesan spun a burning wheel of frankincense in a circle beside her head. The idea? That it would confuse the seed, making it spiral upward, away from the womb. It sounds absurd, and perhaps it was. But in an era when myth was medicine and science was punishment, belief became survival. There's even record of mirror binding, where girls would be made to stare at their own reflection while swallowing tinctures made of licorice root, sesame oil, and cobra bile. The idea was that the reflection absorbed the sin, while the liquid washed it away. One girl, recorded only as Padma of the Fifth Bell House, reportedly underwent this so many times that she stopped recognizing her own face. She began to call herself the other Padma, and would whisper to her shadow before every client. Every one of these methods, whether rooted in herb, blood, or illusion, stemmed from a single fear: the power of creation without permission. These women were treated as divine vessels when convenient, and disposable when not, and so they turned their bodies into battlegrounds, where divinity, deception, and desperation met. But the question lingers. In a culture that claimed to revere the feminine, why were its most sacred daughters forced to mutilate the very force that made them powerful? By the time a courtesan reached her third year of service, survival became an art, not just of seduction, but of protection. And when herbs, chants, and copper wires weren't enough, they turned to the body itself, to transform it into a vessel that could deny conception at the very gate. One method, whispered only among the highest-ranking women, involved Nirgal Bara, the weight of the dead moon. It was less a medicine and more a ritual of tension. A stone, precisely rounded and coated in buffalo fat, was inserted into the womb immediately after service. The stone was carved with symbols of Kali, goddess of destruction, and believed to confuse the seed. Over time, the weight caused pain, bleeding, and in some cases permanent infertility. But to the courtesans, that was a price more predictable than pregnancy. Another was the fire threading. Before menstruation, the inner thighs were scored with heated brass needles dipped in neem sap, not for beauty, not for punishment, but to trigger what the elders called blood reflection, the belief that external wounds drew the body's flow away from the womb. Girls were told the scars would make them invisible to pregnancy, and so many bore them proudly, hidden under silk but never forgotten. Some researchers now suspect the heat caused endocrine disruption, though few can agree how effective or how deadly it truly was. Then came the veil of salt. This was not inserted, it was worn. A pouch filled with coarse salt and ash from burned turmeric roots was sewn into the underlayer of a courtesan's garment, directly above the pelvis. The belief? That salt drew out heat, and thus, life. Before intercourse, some would press the pouch to their skin and recite a mantra known only to their lineage, a mantra that ended with the words, "Leave no trace, take no seed." Some women claimed it worked. Others bore children with dry skin and sickly lungs, and blamed the salt not for prevention, but for damage. Not all of these rites were taught. Some were stumbled upon in desperation, like the milk drying smoke. In regions near Bengal, older courtesans would burn a mixture of donkey dung and dried clove in sealed clay pots. The smoke, inhaled through a reed straw during the luteal phase, was believed to dry the milk, code for preventing fertility. Many girls vomited, some fainted. A few lost their sense of smell forever. But those who survived often said they felt lighter, though it was never clear if they meant their bodies or their burdens. And then there was the lotus trap, a device so rare its existence is debated even today. Worn like an inner crown, this spiked copper ring would contract during climax, designed not only to repel but to injure. It was used only in cases of coercion, when clients refused to heed consent. The client might leave bleeding, humiliated, enraged. But word spread fast, and in some houses, the mere rumor of a girl wearing the lotus trap was enough to guarantee she'd never be forced again. Academic debates rage on. Some claim these stories are folklore exaggerated by oral retellings. Others insist that remnants of the rings, the powders, and the salted pouches have been uncovered in burial sites, hidden beneath layers of ceremonial cloth, wrapped with reverence, not shame. But what's undeniable is the pattern. These women didn't wait for permission to protect themselves. They turned pain into armor, ritual into science, suffering into control, and sometimes they paid with their lives to do so. And as we move into the final part, the question isn't just what methods were used, it's how far a soul could be pushed before the body rebelled. Because in the last set of rites, conception wasn't the only thing being warded off. Sometimes the goal wasn't just to avoid birth, it was to erase any trace that something ever lived at all. There's a point where prevention becomes obliteration, where the body is no longer a site of negotiation, but a battlefield scorched to ensure no new life could ever grow. In the final and most secretive rites, the goal shifted from delaying motherhood to erasing the very potential of it. One such rite was the ceremony of hollowing. Practiced only in twilight hours and under temple supervision, this involved the insertion of heated ivory spoons coated in powdered bark from the datura plant, a known hallucinogen and toxin. The idea was to scoop out the moon, as the elders phrased it. Girls were told that doing this during the new moon would strip their womb of lunar memory, rendering it invisible to the gods of fertility. In reality, it likely caused intense inflammation, scarring, and irreversible internal damage. But in houses where children meant punishment, that was seen not as harm, but as salvation. Even more terrifying was the rite of the red mirror. A girl, upon reaching her 6th year, was brought into a candlelit room and told to stare into a polished copper disc while a mixture of blue lotus resin and vinegar was applied between her legs. The mirror, they said, would record her purity. But what it truly did was reflect the face of trauma back at her, while the resin, searing and acidic, was meant to seal her gate with symbolic pain. Some fainted, others screamed. One girl reportedly laughed through the entire ordeal and was later found humming to herself in the shrine, pressing her forehead to the stone floor. Then came the most dreaded, the drowning seed. This wasn't a substance or a chant, it was an act. On the night of suspected conception, girls were made to squat over shallow basins of boiling cow urine mixed with crushed chili and lime. Steam would rise, sometimes blood. The matron would count heartbeats out loud. At 108, the girl could rise, if she hadn't collapsed. Many believed this not only flushed the seed, but also pleased the fire spirits who burn away unwanted beginnings. Scholars today still argue whether this was real or allegorical, but the scars left behind suggest it wasn't metaphor. Some courtesans who survived long enough began to perform shadow severing, the belief that if you ritually forgot your own name, your womb would forget its function. For 9 nights, they would whisper false names to the river, burn hair clippings, and sleep facing west with their anklets tied backwards. It was absurd, desperate, almost comical. But in a world where no one remembered their real birthday or real family, what did identity even protect? And finally, there was silence. Not a method, not a herb, not even a rite. Just the gradual disintegration of voice, choice, and belief. The ultimate contraceptive, not for the body, but for the soul. When a courtesan no longer asked about her cycle, no longer flinched at a missed moon, no longer cared what was taken or left behind, she had reached what the old ones called fertility death, not barrenness, but something colder. A woman who could not and would not carry anything ever again. Not blood, not memory, not even hope. That's where the rituals ended, not with fire or chant, but with erasure. 15 methods, each stranger than the last, each born from fear, necessity, and the raw refusal to surrender. You came here expecting curiosity. You stayed because you realized this isn't about old potions or myths. It's about survival, paid for in silence, ash, and scars that never got to be remembered. And maybe, just maybe, someone watching this still carries one of them. Not in blood, but in story.